welcome everyone. Thank you to the organizers for this opportunity. Anna and Daniel here. A bit about us. So I'm Daniel Izquierdo. I'm the CEO of a company called Vitergia. We do development analytics, consultancy on open source, and provide in-depth reports. I'm as well a president at the Inner Source Commons Foundation. If you're interested in inner source, there are a few folks around, so there is tomorrow a gathering indeed on the topic. I'm part of the Chaos community as well, community health analytics for open source software, and I am at the board level at the Apereo Foundation.
Hey, thank you, Daniel. And I'm Ana Jimenez Santamaria. I'm working as project manager in the Linux Foundation. So for those who know Linux Foundation, we have different projects and umbrellas foundations. So I'm helping currently mainly in Tutor Group, that it's a OSPO community of practice and open source management community of practice and practitioners and organizations that has an OSPO or involved in open source management. I'm also trying to start with a few community folks. The DevRel Foundation is still intent to form, but it's really exciting to see the working groups taking shape. And recently, I also started helping in PyTorch Foundation. This is really recently, but also trying to help out there. My background is a mix of both angles. So I hold two academic backgrounds. One is in marketing, and the other one is in data science. So I always say that I feel really comfortable working in both technical scenarios, technical scopes, and non-technical scopes, which helps me to navigate between driving the open source technical mindset into more business, high-level mindset altogether. So I think we can get started with the topic of today. And for that, we wanted to do a short intro. I think this report has been shared in other talks recently, so it comes from the AeroStack report. And we wanted to share with you and to start this conversation with you, as it serves really clearly how are the different layers, the digital technology stack taking shape, what are how they are related, and also the dependencies that these are taking. And I think it's a really interesting, it's a really graphical view to understand that things later, such as the data and artificial intelligence, machine learning, and software, are relying heavily on open source. And that is like the zoom in layer that we wanted to talk about today, and how all the digital stack, even though, of course, there are different people involved in each layer, at the bottom of all that, the basis of all that are relying on open source components. And Daniel, do you want to add something to? So based on that, the question will be, okay, with all that in mind, knowing that open source is so important in all these layers and all the technology stack that shapes our economy, how should organizations manage risk in the whole software supply chain?
To mention here probably that one of the things that we've seen in the industry happening, even more if these are companies coming from a more hardware mindset, is that you have a bill of materials of your suppliers with several hundred of pages, but sometimes for the bill of materials or procurement processes for software is 1 or 2 pages. So that's a process that we need to change and evolve, and this affects basically public administrations, government, organizations, and so on. There are, of course, other companies that are coming from the other side, so more software first in somehow, and then they have all that mindset of, okay, all my infrastructure is digital, but we need to change this.
So looking into the software supply chain, as we mentioned, when organization is managing, it's putting from idea to final product, they they want it or not, they are relying on open source components. And it's not just a small chunk, it's a really big chunk. This came from the Synopsys report in 2025 that they analyzed that 88% of code base includes free open source software. So we are not just thinking on a small chunk, we are thinking that what you do, the way you engage with those open source components is going to have a big impact on the final product of any organization you are in.
Well, we all know that cybersecurity is one of the key aspects to deal with, and then because we have all these open source components in our supply chain, that's something that is going to happen. Probably you remember the Exit attack that happened a few years ago, that basically through social engineering, there were some people that take over somehow on the project, and then they started bringing certain malicious code. Because this was open source, everyone was able to look at this, and then at some point, some people realized something wrong is happening here. All this started, well, there are some, information is public basically, but there is a mailing list where the main committer said, hey, I basically burn out. I want to leave the project. I have some mental problems, and I would like to move forward, right? I don't know exactly the words. But basically, that was said publicly. And then 2 years later, we have the problem. So that's basically happening. And going to the Nebraska, of open source suppliers and everything, we have literally those small components that we don't know they exist at some point. So that's why we need this software bill of materials and people to understand this, how to deal with this, basically.
Mm-hmm. Which leads us to the question, are organizations equipped to manage risk?
Then going to Wikipedia, what does it mean exactly, risk and risk management? So basically, it's about identifying, evaluating, and prioritizing things. And then it's about having literally mitigation strategies. So what you build at the end of your day is literally a matrix of risks, and then mitigation strategies, and then certain criticality for all of them. And then you need to control them. If you are, this may affect branding, this may affect revenue, this may affect operations, business continuity. So there are many places. If you remember the Eurostack pile of everything, we are discussing, or they were discussing about water suppliers to literally AI suppliers. So all of this, there might be supply chain attacks. We are, or the things that we can do here in this audience is basically about, or mainly about a digital related. So that's why we are discussing about software and AI. But this damage cost specifically on cybersecurity is literally growing and growing and growing. So you can see some numbers. And that's go ahead. No, and that's basically a problem. And then we see two visions.
Yeah, so taking into like how the definition that Daniel explained, we have been saying in organizations 2 ways to approach this. We call it like the fear-driven and the action-driven. The fear-driven is, oh no, we cannot control open source technology, so the easiest path is to get rid in the supply chain, which might be almost impossible right now, but there are still organizations that still believes that that is the path. Let's get rid of it. Let's try to reduce. And this just creates more problem. And there is the action-driven. That is, OK, why not treating open source technology, open source software technology as partners? Because the technology is sustained by a community, right? So this mindset will be, OK, we cannot control, but we can manage this open source technology in our organization. And to do that, we must partner with their community, with the community behind those projects. So to the question, are organizations equipped to manage risk in the different layers? As Daniel mentioned, we want to focus more on the 2 last layers that are more related to software, that is data and AI and machine learning and software. So to try to solve this question, we need to go to a broader angle and see risk and see how to and see the concept of managing risk as if the organizations are equipped to build partnerships with open source communities. is something that might be, oh no, this is a different scope, but because open source ecosystem is so different, it cannot work without thinking on these partnerships and these open source communities, even from a security and risk management perspective. And now we're going to try to explain you why we think this is this way, or why we think this can help organizations to go beyond this. So, oh, OK. I was like, no, the images won't go on. So in order to think on that, in order to manage risk through this angle, the organizations are going to need talent and subject matter experts that understands how open source communities works, that understands how the structures, the community structures works, the governance models works. And because there is not just one governance model, there are different ways to understand governance and community structure, you're going to need special talent into that. These entities, that's OSPOs, and you can call it differently, open source management centers, open source managers, have been proven to help to that. As they're becoming more and more cross-skill, this came from a study that we have been doing in the To-Do group since 2018. We have been seeing this trend on evolution of open source managers becoming more cross-skilled, becoming more friends in security, more friends in legal, more friends in even management, in even business, if we think in a company context. So we're seeing benefits that has been reported by organizations with an OSPO that said that 80% of these people, of these organizations, saw that their OSPO have a meaningful positive impact on the ability to work with open source communities. There are also noticed that the 91% of OSPOs are involved in managing security issues, and the 84% are involved in state-of-the-art technologies, models involved in generative AI, which is also an interesting point of view from how this open source talent is also helping not just on security, but also from an innovation point of view. Always taking into account these open source engagements that they are able to provide.
Then let's go, getting started. So first of all, risk depends on the industry we are. So it's not the same safety critical than health, than IT, cloud, or providing services to small companies or large corporations, governments. So that depends. There are different definitions for industry and probably by the different size. And the very first step that we see is basically how to identify open source risks. So basically the industry is focusing on two main aspects, which are, first of all, license compliance. That's one thing. And then the other is basically security vulnerabilities. Now it's where we enter into the concept of a sustainability and maintainability of the projects, and that's part of the discussion that you can have internally by understanding your dependencies, basically the link you can see on the left, and then by consuming information or be part of chaos at some point, where we are discussing what these concepts are in terms of sustainability and maintainability as well. So basically the overall health of open source projects. So we all agree that basically if there is no maintenance in a piece of software, this might be prone to be buggy in the near term. Then from this worst case scenario to the best case scenario that everything is rainbows everywhere. So there are a lot of grays. So it's how to find those. That's basically the problem we are trying to solve somehow in chaos.
So the next step in our risk management pipeline will be evaluate open source risk. So how this open source talent can evaluate this. There are a few questions that you can ask, or you can ask the organization. The first, how is your relationship? In thinking on building partnerships and become partners of open source communities, how much do you know the community structure of the project. Because you can think, oh yeah, we have a lot of dependencies coming from this open source project, but we don't know how to engage, we don't know about the project, like we just use it. And that's why it's so important to have this challenge, because open source ecosystem is huge. And they're gonna have more or less layers depending if the project is hosted in that foundation and if the project is hosted under which foundation. Because there are foundations, for instance, Linux Foundation has different umbrella foundations. Each umbrella foundations, they have different structures, different charters, and different governance models. Even though there are like common bylaws, the way we operate in Churu is completely different to the way they operate in PyTorch Foundation or the way they operate in CNCF. Thinking that if you know CNCF community is going to help you understand all the Linux Foundation projects might help you on the high level, but really you need to be and you need to know how the different relationships works and different point of view. Like if you are speaking with Apache Software Foundation, for instance, they have a complete different way of governance, and you need to understand that. So the other question will be, okay, if I know how this is community structure, is it maintained? How is the health and the community health of that community? How are the maintainers feeling, and if they are really burned out or not, or where do they need help? There are some tools out there that can help you identify that. The one is the OpenSSF scorecard, and also Chaos have really useful guides to help you get started with understand the overall health of open source projects. And then it can also help you, these same tools, to know if there is evidence that the developers are working to make that project secure, that they have certain automation checks, or if they have any security tools in place to help mitigate those risks in the open source project that your organization is relying on. And this is something new that just came out from the Open Security Software Foundation, a free new course for managers that are helping security teams to secure software development. If you're in the OSPO, I know there are many OSPOs that are more involved in security, so it might be also helpful for OSPOs cross-skilling in security in these days. And the next one will be prioritize those risks. And the way to prioritize, a way to do that is strengthening the open source communities and thinking and having the organization think this is not just given away. This is, if you contribute today, it will potentially help you to mitigate risk that will affect your organization in the future or in the short term. And there are some movements happening, and that has been happening in a few years. Organizations creating FOSS funds. This is a way to help these open source communities. There are other ones, but I just wanted to give you like a snapshot, right, on the different movements, funds movements that has been happening in public and proprietary and private setups. And also wanted to do a shout out that we have these OSPology frameworks and meetings happening in Europe as part of the ambassadors from Europe. I don't know if you know Thomas Stivergen. He's one of the Churu Group's ambassadors in the EU. And we are putting together, hosted by the Dutch Employee Insurance Agency, another OSPology Live in Amsterdam coming this March 26, 27. And we are talking about these exact issues. We have a huge panel and roundtable discussions on security and building better digital products through open source and inner source, digital sovereignty and open source collaboration. So this is not another event. We don't want this to be an event. It's more a group discussion focused workshops where we make actual work. So if you're interested, there are different speakers coming from public, private sector, and even academia. And we're also making this through the help of Linux Foundation Europe and other organizations involved, so it's Curios, Inner Source Commons, and so on. So if you're interested, there is the QR to RSVP and join this focus working group.
Yep. We have no minutes almost. So I'm bringing some data to the discussion now. I'll try to go fast. So this is a use case, a presentation we gave together with ING. It's basically Vitergia, reducing the risk in software supply chain. So this is a use case in a bank. And basically the question we had is literally how do we know the unknown? Remember that we have SBOMs of 35,000, 50,000, 80,000 open source components. The problem is basically how are we able to discover the small components that are critical pieces for my software? And that's the question, how do we know the unknown? So we were discussing about the license compliance, security vulnerabilities, and then understanding the health. The next step is basically, can we predict these things? And then let me bring the concept of community smell. So if you're aware of the concept of code smell, something is smelling not really good in the code, maybe memory leaks. You know, there are static tools that are helping you in this process. In academia, there are specific papers that are telling, hey, if you use community smells, a lot of people working in one area of the code, you know, there is friction. People that are abandoning areas of the code, orphan code, you know, certain things that are community smells, community behaviors that are not really good, those are better predictors for code smells in the medium term. And that's quite interesting because that's something that you can measure because you're using open source. So then we were discussing with ING, okay, let's go for these 3 levels, basically workload adequacy, development velocity, and talent, which is part of the discussion today. So then we defined several metrics. And then what we were doing was to literally go for different dependencies. You can aggregate everything in different software components. Nothing, not rocket science. And then this is an example for specifically Kubernetes. And then we went for the Go dependencies, like 400 packages. It's not a big chunk. We discovered the following for Kubernetes Go dependencies. There are 131 components of them that are very high risk. Why? So basically then we enter into basically detail. So on the y-axis, you can see different metrics. The backlog management index, the growth of active contributors, the time to close staff issues or pull requests, the bus factor. So there are basically some community, some engineering perspective. And then the more you are to the right, basically the more risky the project is. And you can see that there are some big numbers on the right, like 256 for the growth of active contributors, 264 for the bus factor, 224 for the retention rate. Okay, so we are discussing here that we have Kubernetes, massively used piece of software in the industry with maybe 2/3 of their components are high risk because the community is literally super small. There is no retention. There is no growth. There is no growth of active contributors. So what do we do? Well, first of all, we need to be aware that this is it. This is how the industry looks like. And it doesn't matter if this is open source or proprietary software because you will have the same problem with proprietary suppliers. The point is that you have data and the data is informing you this is happening. Of course, we are discussing about Kubernetes. So if there is a problem with any of those 256 components, what will happen is the big corporation, a government, someone will say, okay, I bring the resources, I bring the people. So this is not a problem, because probably these ones are known dependencies that are kind of critical for this. But what happens with those that we don't know? So this is about illustrating where we are at the stage. So and this is only an analysis again of 400 components of Kubernetes, which is massively used out there. What happens with the rest of my SBOM? What happens with the rest of my 80,000 components? Well, we need to know basically. We need to discover the unknown. So final remarks.
Yeah, and so I think that once you manage and discover the unknown, as Daniel was showing in this a great example use case, we can then see how to better meet critical providers in the open source sphere and work the open source communities. But before doing that and trying how to mitigate risk through this mindset on building partnerships with communities, we need to know what's going on. And I think that that is that will be my final remark. And my takeaway on this talk.
Absolutely. It's basically about learning and understanding and creating awareness of who we are, what we are using, and then you can attack all the problems that we've been discussing today and yesterday, digital sovereignty, making decisions about where to invest my developers, where to invest resources and money, where to go, can I trust this partner, competitive landscape. So there are many reasons why you are interested in learning about this and basically about your SBOM. So this is all. Yep. Thank you all for your time.
I wanted to ask, one strategy to deal with risk for companies is to externalize the risk. So to not deal with by themselves, but for example, pay somebody to do it, like using open source as a service or paying subscriptions to somebody. How do you see that in this picture, and how do you see that, which effect does it have on what you describe, partnering with communities and making sure that they actually thrive if a company is very passive by just paying for somebody else to handle the risk?
If I start, so the first thing that came to my mind when you said that is basically the automotive industry, where literally everyone is liable of everything, but not the OEM, which is quite interesting. So is that a broken industry? I don't know. I don't want to say that. I didn't say that in public, please cut that. But the point is that do you think this works? So the way I think we are considering this partnership is in the same way that you're a big corporation, so you have some partners that are giving you good services and they are helping you to grow. You go through a procurement process with them. So you do risk management, you do certain things. You need to check if they are ISO certified on certain aspects. So why not doing the same with open source? Open source, they will not be certified. They will not have a, whatever. But the point is that you can treat them as if they were your partners. So then you grow together. So then it's a partnership, win-win situation. How do you, what are the policies that we can apply to those open source projects that you are using? So it's basically about having a conversation with them and discover that. It's going to take time, but then it's not an infinite SBOM that you have. So there are some critical pieces of software out there, so discover them.
And just wanted to add that the scenario you added depends on how much layers do you want to put. Because, of course, relying on external actors to do that is another layer. So how efficient is that? And that is something that depends on the industry and measure really well, like where are you taking and what are you not taking. But sometimes, at some point, maybe even getting rid of that layer and having that direct relationship with these providers in the open source community can be even more beneficial. But that's up to the specific scope and use case of the organization.
Thank you. So we have 2 minutes left. If anybody's got a real quick question. Real quick? Okay.
In your research, have you come across the risk of relicensing, and if there's any metrics to suggest if relicensing is a risk?
We have Dawn Foster. Maybe she should answer the
Maybe
question.
Dr. Dawn Foster of the Chaos Project and longtime open source contributor can answer.
So yeah, we do see it as a risk, and there are some things you can look for. A contributor license agreement is one kind of red flag. So Max in his presentation yesterday talked about a tool that they have within Deutsche Bahn to flag some of these issues. But it is something that we see being continuing to be an issue, but it is still relatively rare. I mean, if you look, there have been maybe a dozen over the past 5 years or so that have relicensed that have caused people with major issues. But it is still a concern, and you can look at projects under neutral foundations, projects that don't have CLAs. There are some things you can look for, but it's a hard problem.
We have indeed, just from a more commercial perspective, some customers that they are asking us this exact question, and even if there is the probability is quite low because there have not been that many. That's a fact, and people are afraid of this. So the very first question that they had is basically, well, I don't know where we are using open source. Second step is what happens if this open source is changing the license. So then that exactly, and then this is where you can start playing with information as copyright owner. So then if this is only owned by a single vendor or individual, then you can change the license. It's quite easy. You have everything. Or if this is under a foundation. So there are certain aspects that you can measure from a more quantitative point of view, and some others that you can measure from a more qualitative point of view. Yeah, bring that to a risk model and use that internally.
And we are at time. So thank you for answering the questions. Thanks, Don, for being a good sport and letting us put you on the spot.